In the gleaming marble lobby of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across polished floors and the city's elite gathered for another exclusive charity gala, nobody expected that within minutes, the evening's most humiliating moment would transform into its most heroic. Michael Chen, a 42-year-old single father working double shifts as both a night driver and part-time janitor, had just been publicly degraded by Billionaire CEO Olivia Sterling in front of rolling cameras and hundreds of witnesses. Her words still echoed through the opulent space. "Don't you dare touch my dress with those filthy hands." But when Sterling collapsed moments later, gasping for air as an allergic reaction seized her throat, the same man she had just humiliated was the only one who stepped forward. The question that would define both their lives hung in the air, like the expensive perfume that had triggered her near-fatal attack. Would the man she had just destroyed choose to save her, or simply walk away? The story that led to this moment had been written in the cramped, 300-square-foot apartment that Michael shared with his 8-year-old daughter Emma on the outskirts of the city. Their home sat on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse, where thin walls carried every sound, and the elevator worked only half the time. But within those modest walls lived a warmth that no mansion could replicate. Each morning began with Michael braiding Emma's dark hair while she practiced her spelling words, her small voice filling their kitchen with the careful pronunciation of vocabulary far beyond her years. She was brilliant, this daughter of his, with eyes that sparkled when she solved math problems, and a laugh that could lift his spirits after the most exhausting nights. Michael's life had been carved into precise 12-hour segments. Days belonged to Emma, walking her to Jefferson Elementary School, helping with homework at the community center while he waited for his evening shift, reading her bedtime stories borrowed from the library. Nights belonged to work, driving executives to airport terminals, cleaning office buildings when the city slept. Occasionally picking up extra shifts at catering events when the bills demanded it. He had learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, sustained by instant coffee, and the knowledge that every dollar earned brought Emma closer to opportunities he had never imagined for himself. The skills that would prove crucial that evening had been forged years earlier, when Michael worked part-time as an emergency response volunteer. After a construction accident that left his coworker trapped under scaffolding, Michael had dedicated himself to learning every aspect of first aid and emergency medicine that civilian training would allow. He carried a compact medical kit wherever he went, its contents carefully organized and regularly checked. CPR certification, wilderness, first aid, emergency trauma response. These became his evening classes while Emma did homework beside him, both of them students in their own ways. Emma's dreams were simpler and more complex than her father's. She wanted to dance. Not the casual movement of childhood play, but the disciplined grace of classical ballet that she had glimpsed through the windows of the Riverside Academy of Dance. The lessons cost $150 monthly, plank. A sum that might as well have been $15,000 in Michael's carefully balanced budget. But he had begun saving anyway, $5 here, $10 there, building toward the day he could give his daughter wings. The opportunity to work the Sterling Foundation Gala had come through Rob Martinez, Michael's shift supervisor, who knew about the dance lessons and the carefully counted dollar bills in the coffee can on their kitchen counter. Extra catering staff were needed for what promised to be the social event of the season, a fundraiser for Sterling's new educational initiative, complete with celebrity guests and live television coverage. The pay would be double his usual rate, enough to cover Emma's first month of lessons and perhaps new shoes for school. That afternoon, Michael had performed his ritual equipment check with the same precision he brought to everything else in his life. His first aid kit sat compact and organized in his jacket pocket, bandages, antiseptic wipes, emergency medications, a small device for measuring blood pressure. He had learned to carry these supplies everywhere, a habit born from the understanding that emergencies respected no boundaries of class or circumstance. As he adjusted his catering uniform and checked his reflection in their small bathroom mirror, Emma had hugged his waist and whispered, "Make lots of tips tonight, Daddy." The Grand Metropolitan Hotel existed in a different universe from their modest apartment. Here, servers moved with choreographed precision between tables draped in silk, carrying champagne that cost more per bottle than Michael earned in a week. The guest list read like a directory of the city's most powerful names, tech moguls, real estate dynasties, entertainment executives, and political figures whose decisions shaped millions of lives. At the center of it all moved Olivia Sterling, the 38-year-old CEO whose financial empire had grown from a small software company into a multinational conglomerate worth billions. Sterling commanded attention without effort. Her silver evening gown, custom-designed and worth more than most people's cars, caught light like liquid mercury as she navigated between clusters of admirers and business partners. Every gesture was calculated, every smile precisely measured for maximum impact. She had built her fortune on the principle that perception was reality. And tonight's event was designed to cement her image as both a successful businesswoman and a philanthropist dedicated to educational opportunity. Michael's assigned station was near the main entrance, where he managed coat check and assisted with guest services. From this vantage point, he watched the careful choreography of wealth and influence, noting the invisible barriers that separated the servers from the served, the helped from the helpers. He had worked enough of these events to understand the unspoken rules: be present when needed, invisible when not, and never forget which side of the line you belonged on. The incident began with something as simple as a tray of champagne and an unexpected collision. Michael was helping an elderly guest to her table when a server, rushed and overwhelmed, clipped the corner of a decorative fountain. Crystal glasses scattered, champagne sprayed in a wide arc, and droplets landed on the silver fabric of Olivia Sterling's gown as she posed for photographs near the entrance. Michael's response was instinctive. He stepped forward with a clean towel, his movements careful and respectful as he approached Sterling. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry about this. If you'll allow me, I can help minimize the staining before it sets." His voice was quiet, professional, the tone he had perfected through years of customer service in environments where his presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. Sterling's reaction was immediate and devastating. She spun toward him with fury that seemed disproportionate to the minor accident, her voice carrying across the marble lobby with crystal clarity. "Don't you dare touch my dress with those filthy hands." The words hit Michael like physical blows, but worse was what followed. "Do you have any idea what this gown costs? More than you make in a year, I guarantee it. Security! Get this man away from me before he does any more damage." The cameras captured everything. News crews, already present for the charity announcement, swiveled their equipment toward the confrontation like predators sensing blood. Cell phones emerged from designer purses, recording devices that would transform this moment into viral content within hours. Michael stood frozen, the towel still in his hands, as Sterling continued her tirade. "This is exactly why we have standards. Why certain people shouldn't be allowed near valuable things. Look at him, does he look like someone who belongs at an event like this?" The crowd formed a loose circle, some guests pulling out their own phones while others whispered behind jeweled hands. Security guards approached with hands on their radios, ready to escort Michael from the premises with the efficiency that such situations demanded. Through the chaos, Michael caught a glimpse of a familiar face. Emma's teacher, Miss Johnson, was watching a live stream on her tablet at home, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as she recognized her student's father being publicly humiliated on citywide television. Ethan Walsh, Sterling's assistant, stood at the edge of the scene with an expression of barely concealed discomfort. He had worked for Sterling for 3 years, had seen her make difficult decisions under pressure, had watched her navigate complex negotiations with grace and intelligence. This public display of cruelty toward a service worker was unprecedented, and he found himself questioning the woman he had respected and defended for so long. The security team's approach was professional but unmistakable in its intent. Michael would be escorted out through the service entrance, his evening of extra pay terminated along with any hope of affording Emma's dance lessons. The cameras continued rolling as he walked toward the exit, his dignity intact but his financial security shattered. Behind him, Sterling smoothed her gown and returned to her interviews, apparently unaware that the incident had been broadcast live to thousands of viewers, many of whom were already expressing their outrage in real time. But fate, as it often does, had prepared a twist that no one in that opulent lobby could have anticipated. 20 minutes after Michael's humiliating exit, as Sterling stood at the podium announcing her foundation's new educational initiatives, her breathing began to change. The air conditioning system had been circulating pollen from the elaborate floral arrangements throughout the hotel, and Sterling, who had developed severe allergies in recent years, began to experience the symptoms of anaphylactic shock. The first sign was subtle, a slight cough between sentences, which she disguised with a sip of water. But within moments, her throat began to constrict, her breathing became labored, and her carefully composed demeanor cracked as panic set in. The microphone amplified her increasingly desperate attempts to speak, creating a feedback loop that sent chills through the assembled crowd. Chaos erupted in the ballroom. Guests stumbled backward, creating a circle of horrified spectators around Sterling as she collapsed behind the podium, her silver gown spread across the stage like spilled mercury. Voices called for doctors, for paramedics, for someone to do something as Sterling's face began to turn blue, and her breathing reduced to desperate gasps. Ethan was the first to reach her, his cell phone already dialing emergency services. "We need an ambulance at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, ballroom level. Woman in her 30s, appears to be having an allergic reaction, severe respiratory distress." But even as he spoke, everyone in the room understood that an ambulance might not arrive in time. Sterling's condition was deteriorating with terrifying speed. Hotel security guards stood helplessly nearby, their training focused on crowd control and property protection rather than medical emergencies. Several guests claimed medical knowledge, but their expertise proved limited to basic first aid or theoretical knowledge, rather than practical crisis intervention. The scene devolved into a desperate cacophony of suggestions and arguments, while Sterling's life hung in the balance. That was when Michael reappeared. He had been walking to his car, still processing the evening's humiliation, when he heard the commotion through the hotel's open doors. Every instinct told him to keep walking, to leave the woman who had just destroyed his dignity to face her crisis without his help. But as the sounds of panic reached him, his training overrode his wounded pride. He turned back toward the building, his compact first aid kit still in his jacket pocket, and ran toward the scene of the emergency. "I'm trained in emergency medical response," Michael announced as he pushed through the crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced similar crises before. "Ma'am, can you hear me? I need everyone to step back and give us room to work." The crowd's reaction was immediate and divided. Some guests, recognizing him as the man who had been publicly humiliated minutes earlier, began to protest. "You can't be serious," one voice called out. "Get this man away from her." Security guards moved to intercept him, but Ethan, who had witnessed the earlier confrontation with growing unease, made a decision that would define his own character. "Let him through," Ethan commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. "If he's trained, we need to let him help her." The authority in his tone surprised even himself, but it cleared a path to Sterling's side. Michael dropped to his knees beside the fallen woman, his movements swift and precise as he assessed her condition. Years of training took over as he checked her pulse, examined her breathing, and identified the classic symptoms of severe anaphylaxis. "Does she carry an epinephrine autoinjector?" he asked Ethan, who was already searching through Sterling's purse with shaking hands. "Here," Ethan said, producing the life-saving device. "But I don't know how to use it." "I do," Michael replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. He had practiced this scenario dozens of times during his emergency response training. But never under such intense public scrutiny. Never for someone who had just humiliated him before hundreds of witnesses. The moral weight of the decision pressed against him. He could administer the injection and potentially save her life. Or he could step back and let others handle the situation, leaving Sterling to face the consequences of her earlier cruelty. The choice took less than a second. Michael removed the safety cap from the auto-injector and positioned it against Sterling's thigh, his hands steady despite the camera flashes erupting around them. "This might hurt, but it's going to help," he said, though she was barely conscious. The injection was swift and precise, followed immediately by his assessment of her response. "We need to get her legs elevated and monitor her breathing," Michael instructed, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had trained for exactly this situation. "The epinephrine will take a few minutes to work fully. Someone needs to meet the paramedics at the entrance and guide them here." The crowd, which had been a chaotic mass of panic and confusion moments before, began to organize around Michael's clear directions. Hotel staff appeared with pillows to elevate Sterling's legs, while Ethan coordinated with emergency services to ensure the fastest possible response time. Through it all, Michael remained at Sterling's side, monitoring her pulse and breathing with the focused attention that had made him an effective emergency responder years earlier. As the epinephrine took effect, Sterling's breathing began to stabilize. Color returned to her face, and her eyes fluttered open to find Michael leaning over her, his expression focused entirely on her medical condition rather than their earlier confrontation. The cameras captured every moment. The same man who had been publicly degraded was now literally breathing life back into the woman who had humiliated him. When the paramedics arrived, Michael provided them with a clear, professional summary of Sterling's condition, the treatment he had administered, and the timeline of her response. His competence was evident to the medical professionals, who thanked him for his quick thinking and proper technique. As they prepared to transport Sterling to the hospital, she managed to focus on Michael's face, her expression confused and vulnerable in a way that contrasted sharply with her earlier arrogance. "You," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the trauma her throat had endured. "You saved me. After why did you?" Michael's response was simple and profound. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said quietly. "Because that's what we do for each other when it matters." The ballroom fell silent as Sterling was wheeled away on a stretcher, the evening's carefully planned agenda replaced by the raw drama of life and death, pride and redemption. The cameras that had documented her cruelty now captured her rescue, creating a narrative arc that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. But the immediate aftermath proved more complicated than anyone had anticipated. As Sterling recovered in the hotel's medical suite, attended by her personal physician and a team of specialists, her corporate lawyers began damage control efforts that threatened to overshadow the heroic rescue. The concern was not gratitude, but liability. What if Michael's intervention had somehow made Sterling's condition worse? What if his lack of official medical credentials opened the company to lawsuits? What if the publicity around the rescue somehow reflected poorly on Sterling's carefully maintained image? The legal team's solution was as efficient as it was insulting: a non-disclosure agreement paired with a generous cash payment, effectively buying Michael's silence about the entire incident. Ethan was tasked with delivering the offer, a role that made him increasingly uncomfortable as he approached Michael in the hotel's service corridor. "Miss Sterling wants to express her gratitude," Ethan began, his voice lacking its usual conviction. "There's a financial compensation package, quite substantial, but it does require your agreement to maintain confidentiality about tonight's events." He handed Michael an envelope that felt heavy with both money and moral complexity. Michael opened the envelope and found a check for $10,000, more money than he typically saw in 6 months of combined work. But attached to it was a legal document that would prevent him from ever discussing what had happened, effectively erasing his heroic action from public record while preserving Sterling's reputation. The message was clear: take the money and disappear from the story. "I don't want this," Michael said, handing back the envelope without hesitation. "I want something else. Something that doesn't cost her anything except pride." Ethan, who had expected gratitude for the generous offer, found himself curious despite his discomfort. "What do you want?" "A public apology," Michael said simply. "Not for saving her life, I didn't do that for recognition. But for what she said before, in front of all those cameras. She humiliated me because she thought I was beneath her, because she thought my work made me less valuable as a person. I want her to admit she was wrong." The request was both simple and impossible. Sterling's corporate image was built on projecting strength and infallibility. A public apology would suggest weakness, would invite scrutiny of her character and judgment. From a business perspective, it was far easier to make the entire incident disappear through financial means than to risk the potential damage of admitting fault. But Ethan found himself thinking about what he had witnessed that evening. The contrast between Sterling's casual cruelty and Michael's selfless heroism. As he returned to Sterling's suite with Michael's response, he carried with him a growing certainty that his employer's character had been tested and found wanting. Meanwhile, the story was developing a life of its own in the digital realm. The initial footage of Sterling's attack on Michael had been shared thousands of times, generating waves of public outrage directed at both Sterling personally and the culture of elitism she represented. But when news of Michael's rescue emerged, the narrative became more complex. Social media users found themselves grappling with questions of justice, redemption, and the nature of human decency. The edited clips that began circulating painted different pictures depending on their source. Some focused on Sterling's medical emergency, portraying Michael as a hero without context of their earlier confrontation. Others emphasized the dramatic irony of the rescue, creating a morality tale about karma and character. A few outlets attempted to present a balanced view, but the nuanced truth proved less compelling than the simplified narratives that gained viral traction. The consequences for Michael's daily life were immediate and concerning. His employer, a cleaning services company that contracted with several high-profile businesses, called him in for a meeting that felt more like an interrogation. The company's management was nervous about the negative publicity and the potential for losing corporate clients who might be uncomfortable with the attention surrounding one of their employees. "We're not saying you did anything wrong," Rob Martinez explained, his discomfort evident as he delivered what felt like a prepared speech. "But this situation has created some complications. Maybe it would be better if you took some time off, let things calm down." The suggestion was transparently a suspension, and Michael understood that his job security hung by the thinnest of threads. The extra income from the catering work, which had been terminated the moment he was escorted from the hotel, was already missed. Now his primary employment was threatened by the very act of heroism that should have earned him recognition and respect. Emma, too, faced the ripple effects of her father's sudden notoriety. At Jefferson Elementary, where she had always been known as a bright and well-behaved student, she became the center of unwanted attention. Some classmates, influenced by their parents' discussions of the viral video, made comments that reflected the adult world's complex judgments about class, worth, and heroism. "My mom says, your dad was on television, being mean to a rich lady," one classmate announced during lunch, her 8-year-old understanding, filtering adult conversations into simple accusations. Emma's attempts to explain that her father had saved someone's life were met with skepticism and confusion, leaving her feeling isolated and defensive about the man she most admired. Miss Johnson, Emma's teacher, found herself in the difficult position of managing classroom dynamics while protecting a student whose family was suddenly at the center of public controversy. She arranged private conversations with Emma, offering support and understanding, while trying to shield her from the more harmful aspects of the public attention. But the most significant development was happening behind the scenes, as Ethan Walsh conducted his own investigation into the evening's events. His access to the hotel's security systems allowed him to review footage from multiple angles, creating a comprehensive picture of what had actually occurred. What he discovered troubled him deeply. The original confrontation had been captured by several cameras, and the full footage revealed details that the viral clips had omitted. Michael's approach had been respectful and professional, his offer to help genuine and appropriate. Sterling's reaction had been disproportionate and cruel, reflecting an attitude toward service workers that spoke to deeper character flaws than a single moment of stress could explain. More concerning was Ethan's discovery that someone within Sterling's organization had deliberately edited the footage to minimize her culpability while emphasizing Michael's presence at the scene. The viral clips that made Michael appear more aggressive or inappropriate had been subtly manipulated, creating a false narrative that protected Sterling's reputation at Michael's expense. When Ethan presented his findings to Sterling, expecting her to be outraged by the manipulation, her response surprised and disappointed him. She seemed more concerned about controlling the narrative than correcting the injustice, more focused on protecting her image than addressing the harm her actions had caused. "The edited clips serve our interests," Sterling said with the cold calculation that had made her a successful businesswoman. "Why would we want to contradict a narrative that protects the company's reputation?" It was at this moment that Ethan began to understand the full scope of the moral crisis he was witnessing. His employer, whom he had respected and defended, was not merely a victim of unfortunate circumstances but an active participant in perpetuating an injustice against the man who had saved her life. The revelation coincided with another development that would prove crucial to the story's resolution. Sterling's personal physician, reviewing her medical records and the circumstances of her allergic reaction, recommended that she undergo comprehensive allergy testing and develop a more robust emergency response plan. The severity of her reaction suggested that future incidents were not only possible but likely without proper precautions. This medical reality forced Sterling to confront the uncomfortable truth that her life might again depend on the kindness of strangers, potentially including people she had previously dismissed or mistreated. The doctor's recommendation that she consider taking a first aid course seemed almost surreal given recent events. But it highlighted the arbitrary nature of vulnerability and the interconnectedness of human experience. It was during this period of forced reflection that Sterling began to investigate Michael's background more thoroughly. What she discovered challenged every assumption she had made about him based on his appearance and occupation. Michael's employment history revealed a pattern of reliability, competence, and quiet leadership that had gone unrecognized in their brief encounter. His supervisors described him as the employee they could always count on, the one who stayed late to ensure jobs were completed properly, who filled in for sick colleagues without complaint. His emergency response training was extensive and current, including specialized courses in trauma management and crisis intervention that many professional medical personnel did not possess. More revealing was Michael's community involvement. Despite working multiple jobs and caring for his daughter alone, he volunteered at the local community center, teaching basic first aid classes to parents and teenagers. His students described him as patient and thorough, someone who made complex medical procedures understandable and accessible to people with no previous training. The first aid classes had grown out of Michael's recognition that many emergencies occurred in environments where professional help was not immediately available. He had seen too many workplace accidents where proper immediate response could have prevented serious injuries or saved lives. His courses were free, funded by his own modest contributions and small donations from grateful participants. When Sterling observed one of these classes from a distance, arranged discreetly by Ethan, she witnessed a side of Michael that contradicted everything her prejudices had suggested. Here was a man who commanded respect through competence and kindness, who used his skills to empower others rather than elevate himself. His students, a diverse group of parents, community workers, and teenagers, listened with the attention usually reserved for highly paid professionals. The most important thing to remember, Michael told his students during a demonstration of CPR techniques, is that you don't have to be perfect to save a life. You just have to be willing to try, to act when others freeze, to remember that every person deserves someone who will fight for them when they can't fight for themselves. The words hit Sterling like a physical blow, their relevance to recent events impossible to ignore. She had been the person who couldn't fight for herself, and Michael had been the one willing to try, despite every reason she had given him to walk away. But Sterling's growing awareness of her misjudgment coincided with mounting pressure from her corporate board and public relations team. The company's stock price had fluctuated with each new development in the story, and major investors were expressing concern about the CEO's public image. A board meeting was called to address the situation, and the pressure to maintain Sterling's reputation intensified. The solution proposed by the PR team was both comprehensive and morally questionable. They would orchestrate a media campaign that reframed the entire narrative, positioning Sterling as a victim of circumstances beyond her control while minimizing Michael's role in her rescue. The campaign would emphasize her medical vulnerability and the stress she had been under, creating sympathy while deflecting criticism of her behavior. "We control the message," the lead PR consultant explained with the confidence of someone who had managed similar crises before. "We acknowledge the unfortunate misunderstanding at the beginning of the evening, express appropriate gratitude for Mr. Chen's assistance, and then pivot to the larger issues. Ms. Sterling's health, the charity's important work, the company's continued commitment to community service." The plan was professionally crafted and strategically sound, designed to protect Sterling's reputation while offering Michael just enough recognition to satisfy critics. But it fundamentally misrepresented what had occurred and failed to address the underlying issues that had created the crisis in the first place. Ethan found himself at a crossroads that would define his own character. He could implement the PR strategy as directed, protecting his career and his employer's interests while perpetuating an injustice against an innocent man. Or he could risk his position by advocating for a more honest response, one that acknowledged Sterling's mistakes and properly recognized Michael's heroism. The decision became easier when Ethan learned that the edited footage controversy was about to become public knowledge. A tech-savvy journalist had obtained the original security footage and was preparing an exposé that would reveal the deliberate manipulation of the viral clips. The story would not only vindicate Michael but also expose Sterling's organization as actively participating in character assassination against the man who had saved her life. When Ethan presented this information to Sterling, along with his recommendation for a preemptive response that included a full public apology and proper recognition of Michael's actions, her reaction revealed the depth of her moral crisis. She was angry not at the injustice that had been perpetuated, but at the threat to her carefully constructed image. "Why can't we just make this go away?" Sterling demanded, her frustration evident as she paced her office. "Why does everything have to be so complicated? I never asked to be saved by him. I never asked for any of this attention." The statement revealed the fundamental disconnect between Sterling's worldview and basic human decency. She saw Michael's heroism as an inconvenience rather than a gift, his presence in her life as a complication rather than a blessing. The fact that he had saved her life seemed less important to her than the social awkwardness it had created. But external forces were converging in ways that would make Sterling's preferred outcome impossible. The investigative journalist's story was scheduled for publication within days, and advance copies had already been shared with other media outlets. The revelation that Sterling's organization had manipulated footage to defame her rescuer would create a scandal far worse than the original incident. More importantly, Michael's story was gaining supporters who understood the broader implications of what had occurred. Community leaders, civil rights organizations, and labor advocates were beginning to frame the incident as emblematic of larger issues around class prejudice and the treatment of working people. Their growing attention threatened to transform a personal conflict into a social movement. It was against this backdrop that Sterling was forced to make a choice that would define not only her public image but her fundamental character. She could continue fighting to control a narrative that was slipping beyond her grasp, or she could finally take responsibility for her actions and attempt to make amends. The decision came during an emergency board meeting, where Sterling faced intense pressure from multiple directions. Some board members urged her to fight harder to control the story, while others worried about the company's long-term reputation if her lack of character became a permanent association with the brand. The discussion was heated and personal, with Sterling's fitness as a leader being questioned for the first time in her corporate career. "The bottom line," one board member stated bluntly, "is that our CEO publicly humiliated a working father and then tried to cover it up when he saved her life. That's not a messaging problem, that's a character problem. And character problems don't get solved with better PR." The criticism stung because it was accurate, and Sterling found herself confronting truths about herself that she had avoided for years. Her success had been built partly on her ability to maintain distance from people she considered beneath her station, to make decisions based on corporate benefit rather than human impact. The system had rewarded her coldness and punished her empathy, creating a person who could achieve great things while remaining fundamentally isolated from the consequences of her actions. But sitting in that boardroom, facing the possibility that her career might be destroyed by her own moral failures, Sterling experienced something resembling clarity. The choice before her was not between different PR strategies, but between the person she had become and the person she might yet choose to be. The decision to call a press conference was Sterling's alone, made against the advice of her PR team and over the objections of several board members. She announced that she would address the Michael Chen incident directly, without prepared statements or careful messaging, allowing questions from journalists and accepting whatever consequences might follow. The press conference, held in the main conference room of Sterling Industries' corporate headquarters, drew massive media attention. Reporters filled every seat, camera operators lined the walls, and the event was broadcast live across multiple networks. Sterling's opening statement was brief and unprecedented in its directness. I called this press conference to discuss the events of last Tuesday evening at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, specifically my interaction with Michael Chen and the circumstances surrounding the medical emergency that followed. Her voice was steady but carried an undertone of nervousness that was rare for someone who had spent years in the public eye. I want to begin by stating clearly and unequivocally that my treatment of Mr. Chen was inexcusable, my words were cruel and unfounded, and my behavior reflected poorly not only on myself, but on the values that should guide any decent human being. The admission sent ripples through the assembled media, many of whom had expected another carefully crafted non-apology that acknowledged mistakes while avoiding responsibility. Instead, Sterling continued with a level of honesty that surprised even Ethan, who watched from the side of the room with growing respect for his employer's courage. Mr. Chen approached me with respect and professionalism, offering assistance with a minor accident that was not his fault. My response was to publicly humiliate him, to question his worth as a person based on his occupation, and to treat him with a cruelty that I am deeply ashamed of. There is no excuse for my behavior, no stress or circumstance that justifies the harm I caused to a good man who was simply trying to help. Sterling paused, looking directly into the cameras as she continued. What makes my behavior even more inexcusable is what happened next. When I suffered a severe allergic reaction later that evening, the same man I had just humiliated was the one who stepped forward to save my life. Michael Chen, despite having every reason to walk away, used his training and skills to administer life-saving treatment that kept me alive until paramedics arrived. He acted with the courage and compassion that I had failed to show, and I owe him not just my life but my deepest apology. The questions that followed were direct and challenging, but Sterling answered each one with the same commitment to honesty that had marked her opening statement. She acknowledged the edited footage, took responsibility for her organization's role in its circulation, and committed to ensuring that the full, unedited recordings would be made available to clear Michael's name completely. But beyond apologies and clarifications, I want to announce something that I hope will demonstrate the sincerity of my commitment to making amends, Sterling said, her voice gaining strength as she moved toward the conclusion of the press conference. Effective immediately, Sterling Industries will be launching the Community Heroes Initiative, a comprehensive program designed to support and recognize individuals like Michael Chen, who serve their communities with dedication and skill. The initiative, Sterling explained, would provide educational scholarships for the children of community service workers, fund free safety training programs in underserved neighborhoods, and create a network of support for people who worked in essential but undervalued roles. Michael Chen would serve as the program's first advisor and chief consultant, helping to design training curricula and identify communities most in need of support. Additionally, Sterling continued, I am pleased to announce that Emma Chen, Michael's daughter, will receive a full educational scholarship that will cover her schooling from elementary through college, including any specialized training or extracurricular activities she chooses to pursue. Her father's heroism should not be the reason she receives opportunities, but his character and her potential certainly deserve recognition and support. The most significant announcement came last. I have also offered Michael Chen a position as Director of Community Safety for Sterling Industries, where he will oversee the implementation of emergency response protocols across all our facilities and lead our efforts to make workplaces safer for everyone. This is not charity or public relations. This is recognition of exceptional qualifications and a commitment to ensuring that his expertise benefits as many people as possible. The press conference ended with Sterling taking a question that cut to the heart of the matter. Miss Sterling, why should people believe that this is genuine remorse rather than damage control? Her answer was simple and powerful. Because I'm not asking anyone to believe anything. I'm committing to actions that will speak louder than words. Michael Chen will have the resources and authority to create real change, to save lives and improve communities in ways that go far beyond what happened between us. If this is just public relations, it's the most expensive and long-term PR campaign in corporate history. The truth is, I learned something about myself last Tuesday that I didn't like, and I'm trying to become worthy of the second chance that Michael's heroism gave me. The aftermath of the press conference was immediate and transformative. Public opinion, which had been harshly critical of Sterling, began to shift as people recognized the courage required to make such comprehensive admissions and commitments. The business community, initially skeptical of Sterling's motives, began to see the Community Heroes Initiative as a model for corporate social responsibility that went beyond traditional charity. For Michael, the changes were overwhelming and life-altering. The new position offered not just financial security, but the opportunity to use his skills on a scale he had never imagined. His first aid classes, once limited to small community groups, could now be expanded into comprehensive safety programs that might prevent injuries and save lives across multiple industries. Emma's reaction to the scholarship news was typically thoughtful for an 8-year-old. "Does this mean I can take dance lessons now?" she asked her father, her practical concerns cutting through the magnitude of what had occurred. When Michael confirmed that she could pursue any educational opportunity she desired, her response was characteristically generous. "Can my friends take lessons too? Some of them want to dance, but their families don't have money either." The request led to another expansion of the Community Heroes Initiative, a program that would provide arts and enrichment opportunities for children in underserved communities, recognizing that talent and potential existed everywhere but opportunities did not. The first board meeting for the Community Heroes Initiative took place 6 weeks after the press conference, in a conference room where Sterling and Michael sat as equals around the same table. The contrast with their first encounter was striking. Here was Sterling, still commanding and successful but now channeling those qualities toward constructive purposes, and Michael, still humble and thoughtful, but now empowered to create change on a massive scale. "The initial rollout has exceeded all projections," Ethan reported, his role having evolved into program coordination as he found purpose in work that aligned with his values. "We have requests from 47 companies to implement our safety training programs, and the scholarship applications are coming in from communities across the country." Michael's contributions to the discussion demonstrated the depth of expertise that Sterling had initially dismissed based on her prejudices. His understanding of workplace safety, emergency response, and community needs proved invaluable in designing programs that would have real impact, rather than serving merely as public relations gestures. "The most important thing," Michael said during one planning discussion, "is that we remember why we're doing this. It's not about recognition or publicity. It's about creating a world where people look out for each other, where someone's value isn't determined by their job title or their bank account, where we all understand that helping each other is what makes us human." Sterling, listening to these words from the man she had once dismissed as beneath her consideration, found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. The person she had been just months earlier seemed like a stranger now, someone whose values and priorities had been so distorted by success and isolation that she had lost sight of basic human decency. The transformation was not complete or perfect. Sterling still struggled with impulses toward elitism and control, still caught herself making judgments based on superficial criteria. But the awareness of these tendencies, combined with her commitment to the Community Heroes Initiative, provided both motivation and accountability for continued growth. The program's first major success story came from an unexpected source. During a safety training session at a construction site, one of Michael's students successfully performed CPR on a coworker who had suffered a heart attack. The worker survived, returned to his family, and credited his life to the training he had received through the Community Heroes Initiative. When Sterling visited the construction site to meet the worker and his family, she was struck by their gratitude and by the ripple effects of what had begun as a personal crisis. Here was a man who would see his children graduate, a family that would remain intact, a community that had learned the value of preparedness and mutual support. The chain of positive consequences stretched far beyond what anyone could have predicted from that terrible evening at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. The story reached its emotional crescendo during the program's first annual recognition ceremony, held exactly 1 year after the incident that had started everything. The event brought together safety training graduates, scholarship recipients, community leaders, and corporate partners who had embraced the initiative's mission. Emma Chen, now 9 years old and a student at one of the city's finest private schools, performed a dance routine that she had choreographed herself, inspired by her father's story of courage and redemption. Her grace and confidence on stage reflected the security and opportunities that Sterling's commitment had provided, but more importantly, they demonstrated the resilience and character that had always been part of who she was. As Emma finished her performance, and the audience rose in appreciation, Sterling found herself standing next to Michael, both of them applauding a little girl whose future had been transformed by the choices they had made in moments of crisis and conscience. The distance between them, social, economic, cultural, remained real, but it had been bridged by shared values and mutual respect. "Thank you," Sterling said quietly, her words meant for Michael alone despite the crowded room. "Not just for saving my life, but for showing me what courage actually looks like." Michael's response was characteristically humble. "We all save each other," he said. "Sometimes with medical training, sometimes with second chances, sometimes just by remembering that we're all more alike than we are different." The Community Heroes Initiative continued to grow, expanding into new cities and new industries. but its heart remained rooted in the simple truth that Michael had demonstrated that evening at the hotel. When faced with the choice between revenge and compassion, between self-interest and service, between the easy path and the right path, ordinary people could choose to be extraordinary. 18 months later, as Michael stood before another group of first aid students in a community center in Chicago, teaching them the same life-saving skills that had once made the difference between life and death in a hotel ballroom, he reflected on the journey that had brought him there. Emma sat in the back of the room, doing homework while he taught, occasionally looking up to smile at her father with the pride that had always been there. Now supported by security and opportunity she had never dared to imagine. The students in his class came from all walks of life, office workers and construction crews, parents and teenagers, people who had never imagined themselves as heroes, but who were learning that heroism was often just a matter of being prepared and willing to act. In teaching them, Michael was multiplying the impact of that single moment of choice, creating a network of people who would be ready to step forward when others needed them most. As the class ended and students began to leave, chatting about what they had learned and when they would see each other again, Emma approached her father with a question that had been developing in her 8-year-old mind. "Dad," she said, her voice serious in the way that children's voices become when they are grappling with big concepts. "Do you think Miss Sterling is a good person now?" Michael considered the question carefully, understanding that his answer would shape his daughter's understanding of redemption, growth, and the complexity of human nature. "I think she's a person who made a bad choice and then chose to make it right," he said finally. "And I think she's working hard to be better than she was. That's what good people do, they keep trying to be better." Emma nodded, satisfied with an answer that acknowledged both human fallibility and the possibility of change. As they walked home together through streets that were safer because of the programs they had helped create, past community centers where Michael's training methods were being taught to new groups of potential heroes, the legacy of that terrible and wonderful evening continued to unfold in ways both seen and unseen. The story that had begun with humiliation and nearly ended with tragedy had become something else entirely, a testament to the power of choosing compassion over cruelty, service over self-interest, and hope over cynicism. In the end, it was not about a single father rescuing a billionaire, but about all of them rescuing each other from the worst versions of themselves, and discovering what was possible when people committed to bringing out the best in one another. In a world that often seemed divided by differences of wealth, status, and opportunity, Michael and Sterling's story offered proof that bridges could be built across any divide when people chose to see each other's humanity rather than their surface differences. The Community Heroes Initiative, Emma's scholarship, the thousands of people trained in life-saving skills, these were not just the results of good intentions, but the practical fruits of moral courage applied consistently over time. And somewhere in the city, in community centers and corporate boardrooms, in schools and workplaces, ordinary people continued to learn the extraordinary lesson that Michael Chen had taught through his actions. That the measure of a person was not their position in society's hierarchy, but their willingness to step forward when others needed them most, regardless of the cost to themselves or the recognition they might receive. The story lived on, not as a viral video or a corporate case study, but as a principle embedded in the lives of people who had learned that heroism was not a special talent possessed by a few, but a choice available to anyone willing to put the welfare of others before their own comfort, safety, or pride. In classrooms and conference rooms, in moments of crisis and opportunities for kindness, the legacy of that evening continued to unfold, proving that single acts of courage could indeed change the world. One person, one choice, one moment of moral clarity at a time.